Hello there, YouTube. I'm going to be talking a little bit today about using miniatures in tabletop role-playing. Not necessarily specifically for GURPS, but since that is my favorite system and the system I use 99% of the time, I will probably talk a little bit about that too. But little introduction into at least how I was introduced to role-playing is miniatures and having, because it was D&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition is the first role-playing system I was ever introduced to, and naively thought that that was, of course, the only role-playing system. That was, of course, years and years ago before I knew better. Anyway, I was introduced to it where the GM would actually have a dungeon built in 3D, or part of a dungeon built in 3D, depending on who was running. Sometimes it was just wood blocks, other times it was actual sections of material that looked like stone or fitted rock or something like that to make it even more representative. But that, to me, that was just how you played. How are you going to know where you're standing in a fight if you don't have a three-dimensional representation of your miniature? As I've gamed over the years, I've not held strictly to that belief that every combat must always use miniatures, because sometimes that is silly. I mentioned in an earlier video, but I'll bring this story back up because I think it was a good example of combat that did not use any 3D mapping, no diagrams to show where people stand, no miniatures, no nothing, all done in abstract, or depending on your school of thought, mind's eye theater or immersive role-playing, or whatever you want to call it, where I had a character that was storming the bridge of a ship. Mind you, that probably could have been mapped out for simplicity's sake, but combat was resolved quick enough. But the other members of the party were in a small stateroom with the captain and the first mate of the ship having a drink, and at no point were miniatures ever used. And just through the description and the interaction before the combat started, everybody was familiar with where people were, and when combat did start, it was initiated by the players, and it really only took a few seconds. It was a couple of gunshots that killed unsuspecting people rather quickly. So that is a good example of when miniatures are really overdoing it. But I found that there are times when you just really can't get around it. Over the years, I've encountered some people who just never tried it, and when they do have to have a three-dimensional representation, clear off the table and everybody picks their favorite dice, and okay, you're the yellow D20 and this guy's the green D6 and this guy's the red D6 with the red D4 stacked on top of it because he's riding a horse or something like that. And to me, that actually seems a little silly. If you're going to do it with miniatures, at least, or a three-dimensional representation, use miniatures. It has a much better visual appeal, and dealing with ideas like scaling and distance, it really helps. Normally my videos are done in my office. This one is done in my gaming room here. I don't know how well you can really see it, but some of the miniatures, like the ones here in the buildings and those around the corner, the scale I'm using is pretty much the standard scale of most role-playing games, which is a 25 to a 30 millimeter, anywhere in between there. So if you want to buy miniatures, that's 28 millimeter is generally the standard, although some companies make them a little bigger and a little smaller. I don't personally feel that it's a big deal to have miniatures that are of different scales. I know some people might nitpick, but I try and do a good job painting them. I try, like this, I get toys at flea markets or whatever for cheap, and the buildings themselves, this is just a cardboard box with, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's a material called foam core. This one you can actually kind of see the tag a little bit. I didn't finish spray painting it, but you buy it in big sheets, and you can cut it with an X-Acto knife. And I was just bored one day, watching a couple movies, and in a matter of a few hours I had a city's worth of buildings. This is a representation of a few of what I have, or not all of it anyway. But the material is easy enough that I could just fit it, take the box, set it on top of, set the box on top of the piece of foam core, trace it out, cut it out, and then use that same piece as a template and make more buildings. And urban combat, or indoor combat, I guess in a dungeon, wouldn't really be considered urban, but I think it really does make it easier to see everything. I mean, as a GM, yeah, you can describe that there are guys in this window, in this window, in this window, and go into detail describing the building. Of course, the abstract of the basic white frame, you need to go into a little bit more detail. Oh, it's a post office, so if they do enter the building or what have you, you can embellish it a little. You're not going to have a miniature for every situation, but there is a variety out there that if you really wanted to, you probably could. And then, of course, like I said, the buildings and the vehicles are going to give just an added bit of realism. So when your players are looking down at the table, it's not just random shapes and, well, I guess these are random boxes, but it's not just random pieces of crap on the table. A stack of books here to represent a building, and a stack of dice here to represent Jeff's character. Maybe that was Josh's character. I mean, how do you keep track of those things with a large party? But when you have your own unique miniatures, everybody knows who their character is, and when other players kind of look at that, of course you look at your other players you're gaming with, and you see their face, but you have the miniature on the table. It reminds you of the immersive storytelling too. But when it comes to combat, I've really found that, especially in this particular instance, an urban instance that I have displayed here, there are just too many alleys, too many windows, too many crevices and under cars and all sorts of places that to just describe it all would take more time than just simply set it up and let the players move through it and kind of absorb it for what it is. Other ways I've found miniatures to be a big necessary is more epic combat. Sorry about that, I had to move my table. I don't know how you can see that, but moving on to something totally different. This could be an army of whatever, but this is, I do a lot of wargaming, so I have extra miniatures for other things, but I have an army of Celts pitted against, on the other side here, an army of skeletons. And to me, having that many miniatures, yeah, okay, you have to move everyone and whatever. People can nitpick about that being a waste of time, but maybe I have, oh shit, maybe 100 miniatures on the table right now. That's just a guess. But if, say, your players, we'll just make things simple. There's a player character, and there's another player character right there. And if you have armies that they're dealing with in a combat situation, sure, you can abstract it and just let them fight through the battle. You know, say, oh, you've moved with the troops, or you allow the players to continue fighting, but the overall battle is predetermined, so it's never really relevant where they are. To make, at least in my experience, is to make the players feel like, even in the most epic battles, with high point characters, talking 200 points or more, these are people that are really going to stand out. These are not quite your Achilles, but these are your Ajaxes, these are your Ulysses, these are just steps below maybe somebody like Thor, or Spartacus. There'd be a good example of a real person whose epicness just superseded what they could do. But I have, let's see here, seven of these cavalry pieces. Well, I can say they represent, each one represents 5, so maybe, or maybe they represent 25, we'll say that. And maybe the players spent money and now they have a mercenary contingent of 100 cavalry, but I don't have 100 miniatures. Nobody has 100 of every type of miniature that they need on hand. So you say they're worth 25, and you throw them on there, and as combat progresses and the things move along, it keeps everything in a place where you don't have to keep going back to sorry about that. It keeps you from having to go back to where is everybody. If you're really dealing with epic combat where you're talking about hundreds or thousands of people, having a bunch of miniatures on the table and saying each miniature maybe represents 25 or 50, you can keep moving and keep the action going, but still make it in a presented fashion that the players are like, well, where's the rest of the army? What's the rest of the army doing? Are we winning? And I suppose you could make the argument that, well, from your point of view, you really don't understand if you're winning. Well, that's fine, but our friend here on the elephant, he probably has a better view, and honestly, being 20 feet up in the air, he could probably tell if you're winning. And the guy on the horse over at the other end is standing taller than the rest of the individuals. It's not just because the miniature's taller. That's just how it works. A guy on a horse is taller than a guy who's not on a horse. In GURPS, you can use skills like gesture or signal or semaphore to wave flags or show hand signals or communicate with other players. And actually having a 3D representation lets the other players know where each other are if they're not all in the same unit or in the same formation. I really think it's kind of sad when people shy away actually from using miniatures. If you don't have them, I understand, but oh, they're tacky, or oh, they're childish, or oh, you're Warhammer nerds or whatever. I don't have Warhammer stuff out on my table. There's a million more companies that make everything under the sun, and you don't need to go with expensive high-end Warhammer miniatures. And if your argument is they're childish, you know what? Role-playing is playing make-believe with your friends. I admit that, and I have a good time. If you can't get past that role-playing is playing make-believe, maybe you're not actually role-playing. I don't know. But to say, oh, you're playing with toys, but not acknowledge that you're playing make-believe too, well, it doesn't work for a very good argument. There's a lot of instances where miniatures can be useful. The other useful instance I've found would be these guys here. The ever-present zombie horde. Because when you do have hordes of enemies that your players are fighting against, having a tangible, concrete number, a 1-for-1 ratio, as opposed to the great epic battle where you're using 1 miniature for 10, or even 1 miniature for 100, and the 1-to-1 on the horde situation, even if it's not zombies, maybe the horde of orcs is storming through the tavern door because somebody didn't pay some fine to who knows what, and some bridge crossing that it was dark, and whatever, how it happens, or how it comes to that, isn't really as relevant as making sure that combat keeps moving. People aren't bogged down by, well, where is everybody? Since I do use GURPS, one thing I do is I use a ruler rather than the hex grid. Obviously, on this huge table, in the urban situation especially, I can't lay down a hex map, so I just use a ruler. 1 inch equals 1 hex, and I try and keep the facings, because GURPS uses a hexagonal facing, so you're able to have your different facings. And it's just front, left, right, and back. You actually even have a shield side and a weapon side, and a attack from the side is not the same as attack from behind or from the rear side. And there are races that actually have eyes in different places that can avoid that kind of thing. So that's another handy reason to use miniatures and the hex system specifically to GURPS. But I would recommend people give it a try. I think there's probably combat situations that GMs might even be avoiding because it's just too hard to abstract it. The epic battles, to keep everything pacing, I definitely feel that some sort of representation is almost a must. It doesn't have to be as detailed as what I've got, but stacking up dice and stacking a pile of novels or something and calling that a hill. I mean, if you want to critique it for being juvenile, I think that's juvenile. If in desperation you're using leftover dice as represented instead of a miniature, it has the visual appeal. It keeps people in the moment, because instead of looking at stacks of dice going, which one is who now, they can see who the orc chief is coming through the hordes of other orcs. He's right there in the group, and you know he's there. The GM's described him. You have that miniature that reminds you of that being there. The zombies, the horde situation is similar to the epic battle situation, where you just have so many numbers that it sometimes feels hopeless to players when you're telling them that you do have hordes of zombies or orcs or Thrycreen or whatever the fuck it happens to be coming through the door, or coming up the fucking well, or wherever they're coming from. And there's no tangible number. It's just endless and they just keep coming. Well, that's really gonna dishearten your player, unless they really love combat to the death. That's going to kind of freak them out. But they can see an end in sight when they can visually see the horde of zombies being worked away, or the Thrycreen, or the Formain workers, or whatever it happens to be. And with urban, not necessarily in a dungeon so much, because usually dungeon fights are pretty right there in your face. Oftentimes it's in a room or in a hallway where it's easy enough to say they're right in front of you, or they're on the other side of the table and you're just stepped through the door or something like that, and there's a table before you and they're setting up. What do? That's an easy enough situation to describe. There are not a lot of actors involved, NPCs, that it will get confusing. But indoors in the urban, yeah, with so many angles, so many different directions enemies can come from, windows and things like cars. Well, how quickly is the vehicle going to get there? I can fill up my table with a cityscape, and the combat might be something like, oh, you're stuck in an embassy defending against hordes of Somali pirates or something that are storming the whatever. I'm just making stuff up, but I mean, you get the idea. You can see the car, or you can see the helicopter, or whatever it is. Here's you can see the visual. And this is something that I've done. This is a wargaming thing that I've opted to use for role playing, but it's a model that I paid maybe $8 for. Got a dowel and a block of wood, and now I have a helicopter that can hover over the battlefield. But things like that keep everybody focused into combat. People aren't getting distracted, because the thing to distract you is right there. Oh, the miniatures and the setup and everything. Well, good. That's what you want your players to focus on. Not looking at dice and getting bored when it's their turn and making little pyramids out of their fucking stack of D6s or whatever. The rescue chopper, the rescue vehicle, they can see that moving. They can count down in their head that these things are coming. They can see when combat is coming to an end, or they can see when a new element to combat is coming. You can say, oh, well, the ogre mage is maybe 100 feet away from you, and okay, you can use out-of-game knowledge to be like, well, his move must be 30, so he'll be able to get there in 3.5 turns. Or you can not have that out-of-game experience and actually see him coming down the road at you. You know, each turn he moves, and everybody moves, so it feels natural and it keeps things moving. I think I've talked enough on this one. Let me know what you think. If you have some bias against miniatures, let me know. Leave a video response. Thanks for watching.